What's shakin'? My name's Cam. Welcome back to another video. How great are horror short stories? They're pretty great, I know. There is nothing quite like a good spook when you have a spare 30 minutes in your... So I was looking for some new short stories to read, and I found this guy named Stephen King. Not gonna lie, that's a pretty dope name. He actually has some pretty good stuff. I feel like the guy's going places. I was curious which of his short stories are considered the scariest, the most horrifying, so I looked around online and two particular titles kept popping up.
Be warned, there will be spoilers.
The Jaunt is a short story that King wrote back in 1985, and you can find it as part of his anthology, Skeleton Crew. By the way, on pretty much any list you'll find, Skeleton Crew is ranked Stephen King's #1 collection of short stories. And that's out of 16 different anthologies, so that's pretty high praise. Some of those anthologies having spawned really great award-winning movies, like my personal favorite.
And I know you're sick of me mentioning it, so just shh.
1408. So yeah, that's pretty high praise. The Jaunt starts with a futuristic world lacking in one vital resource. Walder, a father and his family are preparing for a trip. Apparently, they are about to jaunt, and the children want to know just what that means. Dad tells us, the story of an amazing and game-changing invention decades ago. A scientist in a barn has been tasked by the government to create a pair of portals that are capable of teleporting matter over large distances. The scientist has a lot of trial and error, one particular incident resulting in him losing a few fingers. He tests with live mice that successfully make the trip across the barn, but come out the other side either dead or unresponsive and then dead. The scientist has a vet do an autopsy on their bodies, and their bodies are physically fine. The dad explains to his children that the only way for living things to make the jaunt and survive is to be entirely sedated first. They go to sleep in one place and wake up in another. Simple. His son wants to know why they have to be sedated. What is it exactly that kills people who go through the portals awake? Dad decides to keep his speculations for himself, but assures his son that it's safe, and to prove it, he goes first. The dad puts on the sedation mask, breathes in the fumes, and falls asleep. Then he wakes up at the other side, intact and in one piece. But then he hears a scream he knows is his wife. He runs through the crowd of people and the gathering staff members of the jaunt, and finds his wife wide-eyed and screaming. She's pointing at his son, still strapped into his chair. His son hasn't physically aged a day past when he saw him last, but there's something very, very wrong. His son's eyes look aged and older than time itself. They're yellowed and misted over. His son is mad. He's cackling and throwing his arms around. Between his gibberish, the son manages to explain to his dad rather quickly that he held his breath. He didn't let the mask put him to sleep. His son went through the portal awake, and then the dad watches in horror as his son gouges out his own eyes. So that's a brief summary of The Jaunt. Scariest Stephen King short story I've read? No. Still a good short story anyway? Absolutely. See, the horror with The Jaunt is a type of horror that I haven't seen a lot from Stephen King. It's not something I generally expect from Stephen King. What I mean is, specifically in this case, the horror is Lovecraftian. It's the horror of the unknown. It's almost cosmic. See, up until the final act of The Jaunt, it really is just a sci-fi. Like Star Wars. Okay, well, it's not like Star Wars. It's fascinating, of course, to read about an eccentric scientist discovering and experimenting with teleportation, but it's not scary. But that's okay, because like I said, the horror here is the horror of the unknown. What makes this Lovecraftian, what makes this effective, is how little time is spent on that scary element. What is scary about stories like this isn't what we're told, it's what we aren't. What exactly happened in that instantaneous moment of teleportation that drove people mad and killed them? That's actually where my only issue with this story pops up. I didn't make it as obvious in my summary there, but King actually kind of does explain what happens during the teleportation process. If you're awake, that can kill you. But when I read it, it kind of seemed like he didn't mean to reveal it, at least so bluntly. What I'm trying to say is I don't think he was as subtle about the mystery as I thought he was. Yeah, I'm giving Stephen King writing advice. Look, Steve.
Just take a seat, Steve. Let Papa Cam.
Don't worry, I will tell you what the mystery in this story is, or at least what it's alluded to. But basically my point is just that I don't think it should have been as obvious. I think it should have been more difficult for us to come to that conclusion. So, it's suggested when the scientist is putting the mice through that it is either something they see, they feel, or they hear, or they smell that is killing them, because their bodies are physically fine, but some kind of mental or neurological trauma is killing them or giving them heart attacks. Basically, it's just too much stress. Then there is a part later in the short story where it's explained that when the CIA got their hands on the Jaunt, they wanted to experiment, so they sent through a death row inmate while he was awake. And the inmate came out the other side not a minute older, but his hair was white as snow. He was completely mad and he ended up dying, but just before he did, he said one thing.
It's eternity in there, innit?
It's eternity in there, is what he said. And I hated that as soon as I read it, because as soon as I read it, I was like, oh, okay. So if they go through the portal awake, they spend an immeasurable amount of time in some kind of limbo. That's basically what it is. That's why they have to go through sedated, so they essentially sleep through that. It just feels like the line, it's eternity in there, was meant to be really cryptic, but that's what I meant before when I said it actually comes off being quite obvious. And to really hammer it home, then the dad has an inner monologue after his son asks him, why do people die if they go through? He has an inner monologue where he guesses about what probably happens, but it feels like it's a flat out explanation. Basically, if you go through awake, you spend billions of eternities in some kind of like white void with only your mind for company. So yeah, basically we know what happens, even though the general atmosphere or the mood of the story was that we don't. With all that said, that's my only negative for the story. It's a great story, it really is. And I think it's fine for that to be the explanation. Like I said, I just wish it was a bit more difficult to come to that conclusion. So yeah, great story. I have spoiled it. I have spoiled it for you now, so there's not much point reading it, but you're welcome. Okay, alright. How about the next one? So The Moving Finger was published by Stephen King in 1993 as part of his anthology Nightmares and Dreamscapes. FYI, there's also an Agatha Christie book called The Moving Finger. I don't know, apparently stories about fingers are they're in hot demand or something. What do I know? Howard is a timid, boring accountant with a bossy wife. One day he's home watching Jeopardy! He hears noises from the bathroom, scratching. Terrified at the prospect of having to deal with rats, Howard finally finds the courage to go in, only to find that there is no rat. There is, however, a finger, poking from the sink drain and tapping the bowl. Howard screams and runs, of course. There couldn't possibly be a finger. The sink piping was too narrow, too crooked for someone to stick their arm through. He resigns himself to the belief that he had a simple, stress-induced hallucination. Although that doesn't make him feel much better either. He watches as his wife goes into the bathroom, but there's no squeals or yells. She obviously didn't see the finger, so how could it exist? And yet, every time Howard goes into the bathroom, there it is, a big, long, double-jointed finger, tapping and waving. Howard is so scared that he starts doing his business at a nearby store, continually questioning his sanity. This continues for a while until he decides that enough is enough. He buys some acidic drain cleaner and an electric hedge saw and goes home. It takes a while to find the courage, but finally he charges in and attacks the finger. He burns it with the chemicals and ends up in a fight for his life. The finger comes out of the drain like an enormous snake with knuckles all the way down. It tries to wrap itself around Howard, but he escapes to the kitchen where he finds his hedge saw. He's not only not scared anymore, he's actually excited. He feels powerful. His neighbor is outside the door yelling at him to keep it down or he'll call the police, but Howard just tells him to go away. He doesn't care anymore. He's so empowered by the adrenaline of being in a fight and winning that nothing's going to stop him. Howard pops the batteries into the hedge saw and runs back into the bathroom and finishes off the finger. Cut to a young police officer coming into the flat to find it stinking of chemicals and blood. The police officer goes into the bathroom and finds Howard in there covered in blood, sitting down by the bathtub. Howard calmly throws away the hedge saw and explains that it's all taken care of. The police officer's resigned to the belief that Howard has killed someone, but Howard assures him he hasn't. And then a realization dawns on Howard. That finger was probably only one of 5 or even 10, and this bathroom has many other openings. And then the toilet lid starts to move. So that is the moving finger. I know. What the I'm gonna be honest. I have no idea how this could be considered one of Stephen King's scariest short stories. I don't think it comes even close. That's not to say it's bad, it's just... give me a minute. Look, I'll admit, it's pretty creepy, it really is, but I'm just not sure how scared or horrified I could get of a giant finger. I don't know, it just seems like a bit of a silly concept, and again, that's not to say it's bad, it just feels like maybe it would have been more appropriately like a Goosebumps book rather than an adult horror anthology. If I was to try and be critical and analyze the moving finger closely, I guess you could say it's a psychological horror. The story does take place primarily within Howard's mind, where he's struggling with the idea that maybe he's going insane, so sure. And at a really surface level approach, I guess you could say you have this, timid, mild-mannered man who gets pushed around by his wife and his neighbors, suddenly finding himself in a position where he's the physically dominant one, even if it's over a finger. It still feels weird to say that. So now he's empowered. He's in a position where he is the physically dominant one. Not only is he now, yelling at his abusive neighbor, but he's also charging into an actual fight. Despite the horror of the situation, he's actually excited. Look, I just think the concept of the whole story could have worked a lot better for me if it was revealed at the end that maybe it was all inside Howard's mind, or if maybe it was alluded to that it was all within Howard's mind, that this whole finger situation was truly a psychotic breakdown. I thought that's where it was going. I was half expecting the police officer to go in there and find that maybe Howard killed his wife, or maybe he even cut off his own fingers. I just think that would have had more of an impact on me rather than revealing that, the finger was real. Rather than revealing that it was an actual sentient finger. I guess maybe one thing in that situation is that it's creepy to imagine that maybe there's a creature under his house that is sticking its fingers up through the sink drains. I feel stupid talking about this. I don't know, man. It's a finger. Like I said, not bad, just a bit goofy, and definitely not one of his scariest. So there you have it, those were supposedly Stephen King's 2 scariest short stories. I feel like you guys can surely come up with a better example than these. Let me know in the comments. Or if you're what has to be one of the very few people on the planet who are actually terrified by a finger, let me know as well, I guess. I mean, that's probably something you want to keep to yourself, so no pressure. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. Catch ya.